Why do I hear boss fight music? Hey guys, this is Kim. Welcome back to Fables. In this video, I will be sharing with you some of the major boss fights that went down during my Dark Night of the Soul. It's commonly called the Dark Night of the Soul. It's because it's like a descent into the underworld where you confront your suppressed emotions, your processed trauma, your preconceived notions about yourself and about your life. All of a sudden, nothing makes sense, and you're just like, I need to do some soul excavation and self-inquiry and just know myself and understand myself again, because I don't know where the fuck I am. So that's my sentiment last year. Like earlier last year, I just finished my Spread Machine Cards and Oracle Kickstarter campaign. It's called Spreadcrafters Oracle now. And I just got a lot of success from that campaign. I published multiple decks at that point. My business was thriving and I thought I was going to be happy, but I wasn't. So that led to a downward spiral and down a rabbit hole, that this descent into the underworld as we speak, in which I confronted my shadows and my deep unworthiness and all the trauma that I haven't processed and yada yada yada, which led to my perfectionism and all this workaholism and the general unhappiness and mental health issues and burnout and overwhelm. That was my life. So when I was thinking that, I was like, how come I wasn't happy? And I was like, why do I hear boss fight music? And that's when the whole thing started. And after going through this long and arduous journey of self-inquiry and healing and just doing all the freaking work, here I am telling you, having lived to tell the tale. And I'm going to share with you some of the major boss fights that went down during my Dark Night of the Soul. So yeah, I should probably start with how I define a boss fight. So it's obviously a metaphor for difficult challenges in life. And in this video in particular, I want to talk about boss fights as in like some of the most difficult and challenging episodes of my Dark Night of the Soul experience, some of the major shadows that I confronted, some of the big grief and the big trauma that that surfaced and processed, and which involved like general shookness, a lot of ugly crying, and just downright anxiety and panic attacks, and just a lot of labor, okay, just to work through all of that. So that's how I would define a boss fight. It's just difficult episodes, a difficult challenge or moment in which I really needed to dig deep and cultivate my inner wisdom and inner strength and inner resilience. So that would be like a boss fight. So my first major boss fight, the most obvious one, the most prevalent one that came up, like it was the first thing, it was first level. First boss fight was my perfectionism. And that was a hard one because that one was wrapped up with a lot of like other fucked up shit from my childhood and also just my workaholism, because I found out that my perfectionism was really rooted in my deep fear of rejection, criticism, and failure. I was constantly obsessing over little details. I could spend like 30 minutes on the font on my webpage and just obsessing over the placement and the layout and how it integrates with the rest of the text, and when in actuality it looked fine and nobody would probably notice, but I would obsess over those things. And when I'm creating projects or launching my Kickstarter campaign, I would just neurotically just again obsessing over every single little detail. Everything had to be perfect, and it was just a lot of mental strain. And because of that desire to make everything perfect, I didn't allow myself to rest or to eat sometimes. I was just stressed out and overwhelmed all the time because I just wanted to get it done. You know, like perfectionism with time was also like a big problem for me, because I always had the belief that I could have finished it sooner. I could have done it sooner, or I could have just like have been more capable and more efficient with my time and my ability to have done it sooner. So I was always just like whipping myself on the back and just like tailgating myself constantly and just beating myself up for not doing things on time or not enough. And I was just constantly criticizing myself and torturing myself with my perfectionism. And that was really a coping mechanism for the fear of failure and just the deep fear of not feeling like I wasn't enough, and also just this obsession over how I was perceived. Because if you're a perfectionist, if you identify as a perfectionist, you're probably also a people pleaser, and you probably grew up with critical adults around you when you were a kid, and you just needed to be perfect. You need to maintain that perfect image of you, right? And perfectionism doesn't have to doesn't have to do with work per se. It could also be like you obsess over this one quality that you must project and that you must sort of emphasize over all the other qualities. And of course, a lot of this is happening on a subconscious level. So it's not like you're consciously deciding that today I must amplify this quality in order to do this. Everything is happening in the subconscious, so you wouldn't know, right? That's why you're stressed out. So for me, it's like, other than work, I will obsess over like, oh, am I like giving enough? Am I acting as if I'm a kind person? Am I like well behaved? Hashtag Asian culture trauma. Also other stuff like, am I polite? Am I humble? Am I hardworking? Like, those are the things I really want people to know about me, because somehow taking pride in my accomplishments and celebrating myself isn't considered humble and isn't considered hardworking, because you're supposed to work hard and you're supposed to suffer for your labor in order to be successful. Other toxic narratives that are placed upon us to keep us in line with mediocrity and general suffering. That was a really hard one, because perfectionism, it was working, and also overworking was praised in our culture. It's so socially acceptable. It's even socially praised to be a workaholic, to take your business so seriously, to hustle so much. Oh, I have so many things to say about hustle culture. It was a boss fight, because I discovered that it was really rooted in a deep fear of being criticized and rejected, and also just the resulting feeling of like, I'm not enough and I'm worthless and I don't amount to anything. It doesn't matter how hard I work, it doesn't matter how much I do, it doesn't really matter. Really, I use perfectionism and my workaholism to escape a lot of the trauma that I experienced, a lot of the feelings I wasn't letting myself feel. And this was really worsened. This really got worse after my dad passed away from cancer a few years ago. That was when I really dived into my business. Life is too short. Anything could happen. I just gotta do it now. I just gotta invest in my business and commit to my business now. And it was also like, I need something to work on to occupy my time so I don't have to feel the heartache that was losing my father and watching him die. So workaholism and perfectionism was also like a toxic form of escapism. I mean, I guess escapism is already toxic, but you know, that was my first major boss fight, is to defeat and learn to love, defeat by loving my perfectionist self, and really understanding where my perfectionism came from and also where my workaholism came from. So that was the first boss fight. And speaking of trauma and losing my dad to cancer, my second boss fight was grief. And that was a big one. And that was the boss fight of all boss fights. I cried a week, like nonstop. Okay, maybe like nonstop, but every day I would just have little pockets of time where I was crying, because just so much stuff was coming up. So much grief and pain and suffering and just overwhelm. You know, losing a loved one is very, very difficult, because your entire world that you grew up with is shaken up and destroyed, in a sense. And I remember feeling so numb, and then I remember the word that kept coming up for me was feeling like I was being cut into. Like, that was how painful the grief was for me, and not just the death, it was also just accompanying him to the hospital and watching him after surgery, spending time with him, watching him grow weak, and watching him being put in a casket, and also like taking him to the cremation home to be cremated. It was a lot. Like, just thinking about it makes me a little heavy, because it was just a lot. It was so much. And I remember one night I was crying, and I was actually the first night that my grief showed up, I was like, I think I'm holding something in, but I don't know what. But I was like, okay, I'll just hold the thought and just hold the space for that thing to come out. Went to bed, woke up with a panic attack, and I had to go wake my mom to hold me, because I could not. I was crying, and I was like spiraling down into a panic attack, and I was just, so much was coming up. And that one was really, really hard. I cannot even begin to tell you. This is the briefest of recap that I could give you, but the pain that I felt that night and just around that week was just life-shattering, and also exhausting to have gone through it. Like, but I'm really glad I did. Obviously, you know, that's when healing takes place, when you have the courage to face the unfaceable and unspeakable. But yeah, that one was really, really hard, and not gonna lie, it was just like, I'd rather not go through it again, even though I knew it was necessary. But if I had the choice, I would not go through it again. But I would, for healing and for expansion. But that's how painful it was. Like, it was insane. boss level like over 9,000. It was disgustingly hard. So hard. Yeah, and also what kind of ties into grieving was my third boss fight is coming to terms with the disappointment that I have experienced in connection and love. So it wasn't just romantic relationships, it was also friendships and just with people in general. And I remember after my dad passed away, I think this was when everything kind of just hit. Everything just kind of like, it was just a clusterfuck of a few years. Everything went to shit, right? So I remember breaking up with my ex-boyfriend. That was a toxic relationship. He was kind of narcissistic. That was how I experienced it at the time. Thinking back, I was like, I can't say, I think he was really selfish for sure. And then he didn't really treat me well, but who knew? Because I was like in heavy victim consciousness at a time. I don't know if I went back to it again, I maybe would have a different perspective. And anyway, it was a toxic relationship. Let's just put it at that. There were a lot of lessons to be learned. So I broke up with my ex-boyfriend, and he also, this was like maybe 4 to 5 years ago, maybe 6, maybe 5, around 5 years ago. And he started kind of stalking me, not physically, but he wouldn't stop calling me, texting me from different numbers. No matter how many times I blocked him or told him to stop, he would not. And I ended up ended up calling the police because I couldn't get him to stop. So it was like just like a grueling experience of like dealing with all that anxiety and just helplessness of like, what the fuck do I do now? Do I like find someone to beat him up? Like what do I do to get him to stop? And it was just really hard. So, and when I was dealing with that, I also said goodbye and ended a friendship that lasted 10 years. We were best friends growing up. We went to the same school together, went to the same university. We had a lot of similar interests, and then I think we were kind of growing apart already, but that was just a really difficult time because I broke up with my ex-boyfriend and just came out of a toxic relationship. And then my dad was sick at the time with cancer. And then he passed away and my best friend was not there for me. She went traveling, which I understand, it's not like she could just fly back and be with me or whatever. But I remember telling her over text, and I was just waiting for her to say something, and maybe now I would just ask for what I need because I learned. But at the time I was like, she didn't say anything. Like I just told her my dad is in the hospital and he has cancer. No response because I don't know, like I was just so resentful because I thought maybe she just wanted to spend time traveling. But I remember feeling so disappointed because she didn't say anything. She didn't even call me or nothing. She didn't even at least say like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, are you okay? Like, I think it was like after a few days and I was just waiting and waiting. And she's like, are you okay? Maybe it just made me feel like she didn't really care. And when she came back from her travels, my dad was still in the hospital, and then we were meeting up at this coffee shop by the hospital, and I was gonna bus to go see my dad. And I remember like I needed to change the time because I was just so tired, so I wanted to meet an hour later. And she made a big deal out of it. She was just like, why? Like, it's just an hour, you could have toughened up, or said something cold and cynical like that. And I just could not take it anymore. I was just like, wow, I think she's actually been kind of bitchy, and I don't know if I want to continue this friendship. So I remember ending that friendship. Everything was really messy, and I remember feeling really alone and not knowing how to ask for help, and then also feeling like I need to be there for my family because at the time I felt, my family never put this on me, but at the time I felt like I was the one who could save their souls or help heal them because I was the one with the resources. I did tarot readings, I was into shadow work, healings, whatever. I think that was a lot to put on myself, especially everyone was, my family never put that on me, and they would support me in turn, but I just was also in a closed off space where I wasn't really able to receive and didn't know how to receive support and ask for help. So it was just like a clusterfuckery on all level. I was just so disappointed in people, and this wasn't something I really realized at the time. It was like last year when I was going through all the dark night of the soul stuff, when this boss level showed up, and I was like, wow, I think I was actually really disappointed in all my relationships connections. I was just so heartbroken and disappointed in people. I didn't want to try again. Like, I was just like, my heart was fucking dead. I was like, I did not want to love again. I did not want to try to have friends again. I did not want to have to try to have a romantic relationship again. I grew up, I was a kid who was a helpless romantic. I believed in soulmates. I believed in fairy tale endings, which is another issue about like problematic portrayals of relationships. And anyway, but after what happened, my heart was dead. It was dead. It was stone cold. I just did not believe in love anymore. And this was also something I realized later when I was doing the work during this level, this boss fight level. But I realized my heart was dead. I was so disappointed in everyone. And I was finally allowing myself to feel that disappointment. And also coming to terms with the fact that, you know, despite all the problems that I had in those relationships, and there were definitely behaviors and things that people said to me that were unacceptable, that if I went back in time with what I know now, with the boundaries that I have now and the self-respect that I have now, those things would not have happened. I would not have let them treat me this way. Despite that, I was also coming to terms with my self-victimizing tendencies and how I wasn't able to regulate my nervous system, and how I couldn't own up to the fact that I needed to make myself known in a relationship. You know, I need to speak about my needs. I need to learn how to communicate. And also just learning, just seeing myself as like someone with flaws too. Because when I was in the self-victimizing mentality, I always saw myself as the good one. You know, I was the good one. I was never the one that was at fault. It was always the people. And there was definitely like, you know, things that other people did to me that I needed to recognize as wrong to heal. But there was also a lot of times when, like, you know what, I didn't speak up for myself, and that was real. How would they know that I wasn't okay with something? It was just a lot of like internal stories going on. There was this extremely negative filter in front of me at all times. I was just constantly living in fear. And that was another thing that I have to come to terms with too, knowing that, okay, I did victimize myself a lot. I did have this sob story about how I was helpless, but also being okay with that because I did the best I could. Acknowledging the fact that, you know, it was because I was in survival mode and I didn't understand myself as much as I do now, and I didn't have the wisdom that I have now, and it was all part of this beautiful fucked up journey of healing and personal growth. And sometimes you could try your best and things could still go to shit, you know, like your relationships could still fail, and you don't have to be perfect. That's what I learned. Like, I didn't have to be perfect. I did the best I could at the time, and learning how to forgive myself was a big part of this boss fight. Just seeing like, wow, I was actually really disappointed in how people treated me, and I was really hurt by them. At the same time, I was hurting myself by not knowing at the time how to communicate my boundaries and defend my values and defend my space and my energy, and how to make better choices that are more self-loving and self-compassionate, and how to communicate things in a firm but kind way, etc. Those are the things that I know now, and I'm still learning to do them. It's a journey for sure, but at the time I did the best I could, and people had problems, I had problems too, and I'm okay with that because that was where I was then, and I forgive myself for being that wounded person. Boss fight number 4 is having to confront and face all my coping mechanisms that were toxic and problematic, because I desperately did not want to see myself as the problematic one, because it was always the other person. They were the problematic ones. They were the one who mistreated me. Hashtag self-victimhood. So as I was coming out of that, I realized that, wow, I had a lot of coping mechanisms that were not healthy for me to, you know, create healthy connections and loving relationships. You know, like that was my part to own, and that was incredibly hard. It's almost harder than processing the grief from my dad's death. Like, that was hard. But it was like, it was death, you know? It wasn't like, it was really clear that it wasn't my fault. And somehow it's harder to look at yourself and see that you're flawed and that you're not the victim all the time, and you also have flaws and problems and toxic behaviors, and that was a hard pill to swallow, but it was necessary, and I needed to see that in myself, because it was only through radical acceptance and self-love and self-compassion and seeing myself fully that I was able to heal and really beat this boss level. And I'm really glad I went through that. I'm really proud of myself for having the courage to face up to all of that, because it's not really easy to own up to the fact that you also have some shitty behaviors that causes people pain or problems for yourself, whatever. And some of the stuff that I had to own up to was, I already said, my self-victimizing tendencies, my resentment that was built up from that. And another one was my facing up to my inner snow queen. And she is one of my protectors. She's my protective mechanism. And basically what she does, she's a character that I named, she is a collection of behaviors and mindsets that I have within me to protect my wounded self. And I call her the Snow Queen. And I think you might resonate. Basically what I do as a way to cope is when I perceive danger from a connection, and it could be just unclear or unspecified, it could just be in my head, and the other person might not mean anything harmful at all, but I would just kind of perceive everything as a potential danger because I needed to protect myself. I would just resolve to like cynicism and judgment and criticism as a shield to keep my heart away from people. Those were the thorns that I grew around my heart to keep it safe, because I just was so hurt by people and relationships and connections in general that I just couldn't open my heart again. So the wall that I built around it was a snow castle that kept people out, and I kept people out by like refusing help, refusing support, being really critical of little things, and like being hyper reactive over like having a lot of triggers about like jokes or anything that's even mildly that could be considered insensitive or critical of me. I would just times 10 in my head, and I would just kind of like, it would just activate my defense mechanism. But even when it's like someone friendly or someone maybe just clueless about like what are your sensitive spots are, because we all have different triggers, right? Sometimes you need to ask and clarify and communicate them before jumping into conclusions and cause a lot of misunderstanding. Learned that the hard way. But yeah, that was one of my coping mechanisms, is to being really cynical and defensive with my criticism. I like to think that I kept it under control, but clearly I don't know, like I think there were definitely times when it slipped out, and yeah, I don't know. I radically accept myself for having coping mechanisms, and I'm always doing my best to heal, to grow, to become a more compassionate and kind person, which is the kind of person I want to be. So that's one of my coping mechanisms. And another one of my coping mechanisms is, I could talk on and on about coping mechanisms, but this is another boss fight, which is realizing that not only was I the Snow Queen, I was also the damsel in distress. This would probably easily be summed up with a fearful or anxious attachment type, which is like when you're needy and you need a lot of reassurance over little things. You ruminate a lot, especially when it comes to people. You would think about that one thing that certain person said, and you're just like, are we still okay? Like, did he mean this? Does she mean that? Was she criticizing me? Am I overthinking? And you just get caught in this like ruminating like soup, and it just keeps brewing and cooking and simmering until it's just like a never-ending slow cooker of like overanalyzing, analysis paralysis, and then it's just like a week later you're just like, why am I so stressed out and tired? It's because this thing that's just twirling and spinning and just like, it's like flushing a toilet, but in like 1,000 times slow-mo, and you're just like, oh, just go down already. I don't need this shit, but it won't. Yeah, that's another one, being maiden, the damsel in distress, or the needy maiden as I call her. And also another coping mechanism is Miss Perfect, coping with my perfectionism. And also innocent one, seeing myself as the innocent one, the good one, the angel in a relationship. I mean, I still would like to think that I did my best and I always strive to be kind, and of course I failed many times and I'm only human. There were times when I was acting from a wounded place and I was hyperreactive and maybe I was overwhelming people with my tears and unregulated nervous system. But like, you know, I still would like to think that I did my best, but at the same time, I acknowledge that sometimes things weren't perfect and sometimes I could do my best, and that still wouldn't be enough because that was from a limited perspective, or that was just like the best I could do at a time. So acknowledging all of that and also practicing just inner forgiveness and radical acceptance. So yeah, that's boss fight number 4. And I feel like each of these boss fight could be a separate video or just like a long video diving into all of these issues, because I could tell there's just so many things I wish to share from my dark night of the soul, and just all the things I learned and all the wisdom and growth and healing that I cultivated within myself. I just have so much to share and it's so hard to cram everything in this video. Let me know if you also went through a dark night of the soul. Let me know if you went through some major boss fights, or if you resonate with any of my boss fights, or share with me some of your boss fights in 2021. Until next time, be the hero of your own story. I still need a new tagline, like whatever. Also, before we go, I have merch. Look at this. I have a Fables Stan hoodie. This was a complete accident, but you can buy them on my website or on my Etsy. But I got merch. Alright, bye!